My name is Charles Clifton, and I still can't decide whether I should have run back inside that night, or stayed rooted to the porch as I did. Either way, the memory begins here, in the silence of the valley. The evening had slipped into its usual rhythm. I had always liked it out here, away from the towns and highways, where the stars spilled down with nothing to compete against. The porch chair creaked as I leaned back, boots propped on the railing, the kind of scene you'd expect to fade into nothingness, into routine. But on this night, the air felt too sharp, the sky too clear. It was as though the world had been scrubbed down and set before me for inspection. That was when I noticed it. A light above the trees, at first no different than a bright star. But I've lived in this cabin long enough to know where the stars sit, where they move, how they fade. This one didn't belong. It hung there, low and deliberate, and even before it moved, I felt it was aware of me. I leaned forward in the chair, squinting. Then it shifted. No arc like a plane, no rise and fall like a satellite, just a subtle glide across the treetops, too steady, too smooth. My chest tightened as though my body knew something my mind wasn't ready to accept. It pulsed amber, the glow swelling outward in slow, deliberate rings. Each wave washed the forest in a faint, golden shimmer, as though the trees themselves were being scanned. The silence unnerved me most. Usually the woods at night are alive, crickets, owls, the occasional rustle of deer. Tonight, nothing, not a sound, as if the valley itself had frozen to witness this. I remember shifting in my seat, the wood under me groaning far too loudly in that quiet. The light slid sideways without turning, gliding effortlessly, unnaturally. My mind wanted to catalog it. New drone, military test, maybe some trick of refraction. But each explanation crumbled as quickly as it formed. It was too exact, too purposeful. My hand clutched the armrest until the wood dug into my palm. Part of me wanted to stand, to retreat inside the cabin, slam the door, and wait until daylight. But another part, the stronger part, wouldn't move. I sat there, frozen in my chair, locked into the moment as though the choice had been made for me. The glow intensified, catching in the glass of my cabin window, painting my reflection in warped light. My heart was hammering, but I couldn't look away. That was the night it began. The light didn't stay hovering above the tree line for long. It moved lower, descending with a grace that unsettled me more than any sudden drop would have. There was no rush of displaced air, no branches snapping, no disturbance to announce its presence. Just a controlled drift downward, as though gravity had been rewritten for its convenience. I stood slowly from the chair, my legs stiff, knees aching as if I'd been sitting there for hours instead of minutes. Instinct told me to back away, but I stepped forward instead, boots crunching across the gravel. Each step sounded unnaturally loud in the dead silence. The pines surrounding the cabin swayed faintly, though the air was utterly still. Their needles caught the light in strange ways, shimmering with hues that shifted between green and silver. I realized then that the orb wasn't just glowing. It was changing. Its surface flickered from amber to green, then to a white so pure it carved out every detail of bark and leaf. It hovered there, maybe 30 feet off the ground, and began to rotate, but not in the way a ball or wheel spins. It folded over itself, inside out, geometric planes shifting into new configurations, like some impossible object caught halfway through, revealing its true shape. My eyes struggled to follow it. One moment it seemed spherical, the next angular, then something fluid and formless. Before locking back into a glowing hole, the silence pressed harder on me. I exhaled sharply, and even that ordinary sound felt wrong, too loud, too distorted, like it echoed back from the trees in delay. I stopped breathing for a moment, testing the air, listening. Nothing but the thrum in my chest, a low vibration that wasn't my heartbeat. It was in that stillness I realized. I wasn't observing the orb. It was observing me. I took another step, gravel crunching like thunder. My own shadow stretched unnaturally long before me, cast not by moonlight but by the strange glow. Then it happened. The forest erupted in white light. Not like a flashlight or flood lamp, but a complete wash of brightness that left no room for shadows. Every tree, every rock, every blade of grass was flattened into stark, even tone, as though depth itself had been erased. It was like standing in a world without dark, without contrast, a place where reality itself had been stripped bare. My eyes watered, but I couldn't close them. I felt exposed, stripped open in that glare, as if the light wasn't just illuminating the world, it was peeling it back, layer by layer. My thoughts scattered, caught between awe and a primal, wordless fear. For the first time that night, I whispered my own name into the silence. "Charles Clifton," I said, voice trembling, as if reminding myself that I was still here, that I still belonged to this place. The light did not answer, but it did not leave either. The light held me in its grip for what felt like an eternity. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, tried to shake the brilliance out of my vision, but it clung stubbornly, as if it had sunk behind my eyes. Then, without any warning, the orb dimmed, not vanishing, not retreating, but reducing itself, as though it had decided I'd seen enough. That was when I noticed my watch. I raised my wrist slowly, almost absently. The hands were frozen, stuck at a time that no longer made sense. My chest tightened. I tapped the glass, shook my arm, listened for the familiar tick. Nothing, not a sound. I lowered my arm, and that's when I realized it wasn't just my watch that had stopped. It was everything. The woods, usually alive with the unseen motion of nocturnal life, had become a tableau. I looked to the trees, where moments earlier a bird had startled and taken flight. Now it was still, wings outstretched mid-air, suspended in place like a photograph torn free from time. My breath grew shallow. I could feel my own heart pounding, my body still moving freely, but the world around me was caught in paralysis. The orb shifted again, the low hum growing louder, no longer subtle but resonant, crawling into my chest cavity and reverberating through bone. Across its surface, lines began to appear. At first they looked like cracks, fissures etched by impossible heat, but then they pulsed with light, intricate lattices, glowing with the precision of circuitry. They weren't random, they were deliberate. The air tasted of static, metallic on the tongue. My arms prickled with goose flesh, every hair rising as though the entire forest floor had been wired with electricity. The gravel beneath my boots quivered, not violently, but just enough that I noticed each stone shifting against the other, a subtle tremor that felt alive. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came. Words didn't seem appropriate. Instead, a strange thought filled my mind. This isn't a light, this is a lens, and I am standing at its center. And then, motion returned, but not the way it should have. Time itself seemed bent, halved. The trees swayed as if under water. The bird, once frozen mid-flight, began to move again, but each wing beat dragged, stretched across seconds instead of fractions of one. The sound of my own breath stuttered unnaturally in my ears, drawn out like a tape reel slowing to a crawl. The orb remained untouched by this distortion, perfectly stable in its hovering place, as if the rules of this warped moment did not apply to it. It observed, it waited, and I, Charles Clifton, stood in the middle of a world I no longer recognized, wondering if time had broken, or if I had simply been pulled into someone else's. The warped rhythm of the world didn't last. It snapped back into place without ceremony, as though a great hand had released it. The bird vanished into the trees with a stuttering cry. The leaves shifted in a breeze that hadn't been there a moment before, and my watch ticked once more, skipping forward several minutes, as if time itself had chosen not to account for what had just happened. But the orb remained, and it had moved closer. It hovered now at the edge of the clearing, only a dozen paces away, suspended just above the ground. The hum that had been low and bone-deep now carried a strange tonal structure. Not one sound, but several, weaving together in overlapping layers, rising and falling in ways that felt almost melodic. The forest seemed to breathe with it, as though every living thing was caught inside its rhythm. I could see details now that hadn't been visible before. The surface wasn't smooth. It flowed, endlessly, like liquid metal in constant motion. Silver rivers folded into one another, reshaping patterns as they went, yet never breaking the orb's form. It was as if the craft itself wasn't built. It was alive. I should have been afraid. I should have run back to the cabin, bolted the door, and waited for the morning sun. But instead, I stepped forward. My boots sank softly into the damp earth. My body moved as though commanded, not by force, but by invitation. The light adjusted to me, softening, narrowing its brilliance until it glowed like a halo rather than a flood. It was then that the sound entered my mind. Not through my ears, but deeper, bypassing language and reason. Pulses of thought, images without images, sensations without origin. A communication that wasn't about words, but about knowing. I staggered slightly, bracing myself against the sensation. I wasn't being spoken to. I was being read. I caught impressions that didn't belong to me, stars folding in upon themselves, landscapes of ice and fire, shapes that moved in patterns beyond geometry. Then, just as quickly, silence returned, yet the certainty lingered. This thing had touched me, reached inside, peeled back layers I'd never consented to reveal. I froze there, halfway between the safety of the cabin and the pull of the light, realizing that it wasn't just here for me. It was here through me. I felt as though unseen eyes, countless in number, pressed against the edges of perception, watching, measuring, deciding. The forest around us stretched tall and dark, but above the orb, the night sky seemed different now, no longer a random scatter of stars, but a hidden pattern. Lines faintly revealed themselves, geometries drawn in light, as though the universe itself was stitched together in ways I had never imagined. And all of it, the patterns, the pressure, the silence, focused back on me. Charles Clifton, a man alone in the woods, standing at the edge of an invitation I could not understand. For a long time, the orb held its place, suspended there, silent again, yet thrumming with presence. I could feel its weight in my chest, in my teeth, even behind my eyes. It wasn't sound anymore. It was something deeper, woven into my very nerves. I stood in the clearing, the damp earth soft beneath my boots, the night pressing in at the edges. Then, without warning, the tones inside me changed. What had been a harmony turned dissonant, rising, tightening, building pressure until I winced and staggered back. My vision blurred, my head swam. And just when I thought I might collapse, the sound snapped off, cut to nothing. The sudden silence rang louder than the tones themselves. And then, the orb began to rise. Slowly at first, as if reluctant to leave. It lifted through the branches with impossible delicacy, weaving between them without disturbing a twig. Its glow spilled down in radiant beams, cutting long, pale shafts through the forest floor. The trees bent outward as it climbed, not swaying with wind, but as though a pressure was lifting off them, a weight too subtle to measure until it was gone. The needles shivered, releasing a rain of faintly glowing dust that caught in the light. I realized then that the silence had broken, not abruptly, but gradually. Crickets chirped hesitantly. A single owl called. The breath of the world returned. I watched it rise higher, its glow shrinking against the spread of the stars. My knees felt weak, but I couldn't sit, couldn't retreat. I needed to see it until the last possible moment. Needed to confirm it had truly gone, that I hadn't invented this madness inside my head. My shadow stretched long across the empty clearing, as though marking me, branding me, as the sole witness. At last, the orb was no longer an orb. It was a star again, one among many. But the sky was different now. The constellations seemed muted, duller than they had before. Or perhaps it was my perception that had changed. Perhaps once you've seen a thing like that, up close, deliberate, undeniable, the ordinary brilliance of the heavens can never shine the same way again. I stood there for what felt like hours, though when I finally checked my watch, only minutes had passed. I whispered my own name again into the silence, grounding myself in the only anchor I had left. Charles Clifton. Here. Still here. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. That light hadn't just passed over me. It hadn't just scanned me. It had chosen me. The impression lingered, heavy and inescapable. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something larger, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. And as I turned back toward the cabin, the valley wrapped in silence once more, I realized I would never again be only Charles Clifton, the man who lived alone in the woods. I was something else now. A witness. A mark upon the sky.